free when the back door pops open. There's legitimately people out running on this.
Howdy, and welcome back to the channel. Hope everyone had a good holiday. I know I did because we acquired another Christmas Rover. If you remember from the previous Rover rescue picture or video we did, we got the 95 long wheelbase. This 97 slick top disco was in the background, and we've got a no Rover left behind policy, so we went back today and picked this one up as well. Really great color, drove it back, no issues, slick top, just an overall very decent rust-free example of it. But today, I decided to mix it up a little bit to kind of talk about the Disco one in comparison to the Range Rover Classic. I haven't seen a whole lot of, content kind of comparing the two, and there really is, I think, a separation of Rover ownership between D1 guys and Classic guys. So I kind of wanted to kind of compare the two and go over, what I think of each one and the the positive and negative factors that kind of go into each one and what their strong points are. There's a lot of personal preference that goes into your choice of a Classic versus Disco, but at the end of the day, they're also very similar, similar trucks, and I think you really can't go wrong either way. All right, so pop the hoods here. We're going to start with powertrains first. And again, most of you are wondering why I'm comparing the 88 to a 97. There's almost a 10-year gap as far as model year and whatnot, but the technology in that time frame didn't really change all that much. You're still using the same Buick blocks. The 3.5 in this one probably made a roughly about 140-ish horsepower new. Who knows what it makes now? Probably around 100. The 4-liter in the 97 came factory with about 190 horsepower. I'll tell you what, I've driven both on the highway. The power seems about the same from both trucks, so not a whole lot of upgrade, I guess, as far as in the used market 10, 15, 30 years later in these trucks. So I love when people compare old cars and give horsepower ratings to 100,000 mile, engine powertrains that haven't been maintained in a while. So it's always an interesting back to back. But, obviously you had a slightly different air box. You had slightly different accessories. That's a serpentine belt. This uses a bunch of different pulleys and whatnot, which, again, some guys like and some don't. If you lose one belt, you don't lose all your power, blah, blah, blah. So, again, it's all about kind of personal choice and preference. The older models, even in the Discos, had, the 87, 88, 89s had the metal coolant tank, expansion tank, which I like. Less cracking. Most of these, like this one, have had them replaced. Tell you what you wish. You can't really check the level as good, but these do tend to crack and fray, and then you lose pressure and creates all types of problems. But again, if you go to the general makeup and design of the engine bays of these two, very similar, have the same drop down rod on each one, just a slightly different location. This one's slightly more annoying when you're doing any kind of engine work because it kind of blocks your access into it. But again, it's not all that much different. Very similar windshield defrosting fluid as well. Airbox is a little bit different, but again, not all that much as far as that's concerned. The motors still look extremely similar. Again, they didn't really change that all that much until the 4.6. They updated the look of it a little bit, but again, it's all pretty much standard. All right, moving on to the exterior aesthetics of both of these trucks. We'll start with the Disco. The D1 lineup kind of started in 1989 with the two-door versions that were usually only available in Europe as kind of a spin-off of a second model of the original Classics. They were a little bit taller, I think they were a little more, their price point was a little bit lower than the standard Classic. The Classic was more of an upsell. It was supposed to be a little more luxurious, but again, it's very, very similar design aesthetics. You have the kind of the taller roof, kind of a throwback to the 110s and whatnot. So it was definitely a different kind of design aesthetic, but also very much the same. You can obviously tell them apart because it has that taller rear window with the exterior spare, which really allows a lot of extra room kind of in the back cargo area. This one has the fold down jump seats, so that was something that was never offered in the standard Classic. But other than that, it's a very, very similar design as far as door handles. They all kind of rust in the same spot, so not a whole lot of changes where that's concerned. There's a lot of interchangeable parts as well. I mean, you can swap these wheels from one truck to another. The general frame design and whatnot is very similar as well. They're not 100% the same, but from an average bystander looking at it, again, it's all very familiar when you jump under the bottom of these trucks as well. The Disco is a handsome truck. I think it's a slightly more, I wouldn't say feminine design, but it's a little bit softer as far as the super hard edges of the Classic. It's just also a little more modern. The lights are slightly more rounded off, and it just gives it a little bit more of an updated look. Seeing how these tractors, if you will, were designed in the late '60s and executed in the '70s as well. So that's your first take. So this was a big deal and a moneymaker for the brand, and I think it was executed very nicely. I think these have aged a lot better than the D2s, and I think a D1's slightly more desirable. But again, still very, very good looking boxy trucks. And again, everyone has a personal preference, But if I'm going to compare the two, I like the looks of both of them. And I would go for either. There's something a little more special about a Classic, but at the same time, a D1's really the next best thing in my book, especially because it's a little bit more modern and I think it's aged a little more appropriately. All right, so the last feature I forgot to mention, obviously the Classic has a tailgate and the Disco has a swing out door, but in all fairness, the actual rear bumper overhang in this is great enough that it does kind of function as a tailgate, and it's not, you're not gonna have to worry about overloading it or anything. So this is also pretty super useful, especially the ones you see that have the ladder racks and stuff that gives you roof access and whatnot. So a lot of really thoughtful design elements also went into the process of this truck. So again, that's comparing the two, there are a lot of similarities that they wanted to kind of transfer over to this truck as well.
When the back door pops open, there's legitimately people out running on this.
All right, onto the interiors. Again, this is not the most accurate back-to-back, an 88 versus a 97, but there really wasn't enough changes, honestly, for me to justify it being a non-competitor. So again, this is it's more of a base model. I don't think it's a Hunter version, but there's no wood. It's all hard plastics, which, again, I kind of prefer the wood. If you can't tell, the wood on this one's fairly nice, but the other ones I've seen, when they sit, the moisture gets in and the wood kind of just comes up. If you've seen on some of the other videos, and I think on one of Doug's videos, some of it's been refinished, but his was peeling off a lot, and it's pretty annoying to kind of get it to look nice. So, this one's super utilitarian. I really like how this is on the inside. It's very late 80s. It's very functional. Everything's big. Everything's easy to touch and move. This one has the lock and transfer case, which is nice. That went away in 89. Again, window switches. The cubbies on these are kind of garbage, but it's all comfortable. The visibility is great. Again, you get that Rover feel. It's kind of sitting up much higher than you actually are. Instrument clusters, super 80s, really easy to read. you know, not super relevant, but you get a lot of hard plastics here that kind of are easily broken off or not functional. But it's one big erector set. All this comes off. And again, it's functional. It's nice at the time in comparison to a Mercedes S-Class or W123 or W126 class. It might not be totally up to that spec, but, you know, the dashes actually would be very similar. So there's not a whole lot to be missed out as far as that's concerned. The stereo in this one works nice. It's got, you know, the classic 80s and 90s setup: power windows, power locks, sunroof, good radio, leather. You know, if you have that that combination, you're a luxury car. So that was the box that was checked, you know, back in the day for this one. But yeah, a lot of gray, nice wood, very functional. You know, but again, once we jump in the disco, not a whole lot really changed. So we'll go check that out real quick. All right, jumping into the 97. As you see, these seats don't seem to be the original seats. They're very nice, they're very plush, but they just seem to be a little more of an upgrade than what I believe came with this. If you look at the back jump seats, it's slightly different hue in the in the actual leather itself. But again, same kind of hard plastic design. Everything's a little bit softer. You know, manual, non-electric transfer case. You know, very utilitarian layout. You've got this kind of cheapy, very 90s. You know, all the Land Cruisers and LX4 or 450s had this kind of stick-on plastic fascia. You've got the clock. You know, this was not this one did not have fog lights or anything, so you're missing a couple of the punch outs for the buttons here. Standard square radio. Again, you can very much see how this is a later iteration of that one, but not all that much has changed. You know, the dash is very similar to a 95 Classic. I mean, that'd be a better comparison, but you know, it's not that much different. You have a passenger driver airbag, cruise control. You know, very simple layout for the gauges, you know, very 95 Classic like. Power seats, same as the other one. Lumbar adjustment, you know, that's a little bit of an upgrade, but, you know, not a whole lot of changes other than that. You know, the interior and the back seats are a little bit more fun. You know, I remember driving the back of these as a kid. You've got the skylight windows, the jump seats and everything. You know, it kind of reminds you of Jurassic Park or whatever movies of the time were. So, you know, a little bit more headroom. So that kind of made these a little bit more fun as far as that's concerned. Storage and whatnot. So again, it doesn't have that same, you know, wider aura and like wafting type of feeling that a Classic does. This one feels a little bit more nimble. But still, it's a great package. Great off-road, and you know, they're also fun to tool around with. Just still kind of an erector set as far as that's concerned. But again, yeah, both trucks have four-wheel disc brakes. You know, solid front and rear axles. There's just not a whole lot different in the actual layout and configuration. So, you know, it's really up to personal preference at this point. And, you know, off-road capabilities, I'm sure someone will lay out a bunch of the different approach angle information and whatnot. But, you know, a Classic without air suspension, stock on coils, is a fairly low truck. I don't have the numbers on me, but this is not a tall off-road vehicle. Again, they both have good articulation and whatnot, but I think the Disco probably has a little bit of the advantage when it comes to ground clearance wise. But again, it makes up for that in the articulation and everything else to kind of make these pretty rugged. So we'll take it for a little drive, and we'll compare the driving dynamics of two old, probably very broken SUVs, and see if anyone or see if us or anyone else notices a difference. All right, we're back in the D1. I got Doug from Doug's Cars with me for this review. So he hasn't driven this Disco.
Fired right up.
He's driven a lot of our Rovers and Discos previous to that, but
no anti-lock. That's the only light, the warm amber glow of the anti-lock light.
Yeah, that's it. But as soon as you get in one of these old Rovers, it feels familiar, and it feels, you know, it feels fine.
The only other one of these I've driven, honestly, is the stick shift mint green one that we drove back, what, last summer from Norfolk, whoever it was.
Yeah.
Oh, brake pedal.
Brake pedal soft.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm used to my old Classic, which probably had the same braking system. It was like hitting a boulder with your foot. Sounds good.
Yeah, it sounds good because there's a little exhaust leak.
So it sounds more like a modern car where there's a little bit of noise.
Yeah, it's always interesting when people review old cars. They review it as if they're comparing it to something modern or have driven the original, not 100 and some thousand miles later.
So there's about 158,000.
Yeah.
Too bad for the age.
Again, it's hard to judge one of these at face value, seeing how it does need tires and lots of maintenance items.
The interior is really nice.
But
what works? I mean, obviously, I can feel heat coming out.
Heat works. Haven't really tried the AC, but again, the cup holders and whatnot are not all cracked up. You know, obviously it's dated by the ashtrays and whatnot, but the cabin's a nice place to be. It's fairly quiet. And, you know, compared to the Classic, it's just softer. You know, the edges are softer, the materials are softer, and I guess you could say it's a little bit more luxurious. But again, that isn't such a valid comparison, seeing how at the time you'd be comparing it to the comparable P38. So,
yeah, I mean, other than the soft brake pedal, it's driving really well.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of saying in the other video. I never really liked the disco steering wheel, honestly.
It's huge.
It's huge, but you know the airbag really takes up the whole middle of it, which, you know, when these early models were fitted with airbags, that really wasn't ergonomically what they were taking in consideration of how it looks. They just needed the bag there.
Exactly. I mean, they were huge back then, but it does really block all of the gauges unless you're going straight ahead.
But, you know, it's boxy. It rides kind of like a truck, which, again, you don't really get that these days. So it's always kind of refreshing, you know. You can only get so comfortable before people want to kind of go back and feel what it was feel like to actually feel like you were driving with a little bit of road feel and whatnot.
I mean, ride's really nice. I mean, this is definitely not a smooth road. I mean, we're bouncing around a little bit, but it's not too bad.
And again, this is one of those deals where the fact that there's not a lot to talk about is kind of odd. You know, there's no crazy groans or squeaks or noises or anything out of the ordinary, which again makes a boring video, but does kind of lend itself to the build quality of these. That, you know, yes, they have issues, but this truck has 158,000 miles on it. So what you see is what you get, and honestly, it's not all that bad. So I've never actually been in the back of one of these, so we're gonna go for a ride with Doug as a 7-year-old me from the 90s, which, look, I'm 6'1" and can fit almost perfectly in the back of this truck. Awesome. All right, we're gonna try the 88 now and see if it starts first. This one's got a weird starting thing. The battery's old and hasn't been that great, so let's jump in and see what Doug thinks. Now, you're gonna have to let me in. So, third off, disco door handles, way better than the Classics. Perfect.
Yeah, I made a TikTok video of that door handle just because why not?
Oh, push the push the thing in.
Did I hit it with my shoe?
No, it just doesn't contract very well.
From time to time.
Yeah.
So, I have driven this one. And this one drives nicely. I remember that.
You know, but again, you know, I was talking about previously before you got here, the power differences and the motor sizes and whatnot. So, you know, 190 versus 140, again, 30, 40 years later, it doesn't really matter. And you don't really feel it all that much, honestly. You know, this is the smallest iteration of the motor sizes. The 3.9 in my 89 feels pretty peppy, but compared to a 4.2, it just doesn't feel like it has as much torque and doesn't rev as freely, in my opinion.
Well, and this has the EFI light on, And
which I've never figured out what it means.
I know you talked about it the other day, but I never had one with an EFI light because mine were always newer than these. But I know the 80s ones have that. And in my mind, when a red EFI light comes on, it means something's not working. But obviously, the vehicle's driving fine. So
yeah, you know, my 89 was the same way. I've jumped the relay out, and it'll go away, and then it'll come back on. So, you know, if you know what that is, drop some information in the comments or something to let me know. It could be an O2 sensor or whatnot, but you know, if it's running, it's fine in my book.
Signals work. The brakes in this feel much better than in the red Disco. These feel more like what my classic brakes felt like, which I understand how the ABS system similar to the Disco. This doesn't have that at all, but yeah, I mean, I noticed when in your video that the wiper thing looks like it's down really far, and it looks like it's down some.
Right.
Like it looked like it was on, but I think it's just maybe the cowl around the column is shifted or something.
Right.
And it's down a little bit, which is weird. I mean,
but you can see
work, so.
And you can see, though, with those hard plastic buttons I mentioned, if you hit it hard enough, if you're taller, you could crack that off easily. And it's definitely a pain in the ass to kind of take all that apart without breaking, because obviously it's old and brittle.
The driving position for me right now, I know the seat's up a little far, but is much less comfortable than in the Disco, because my right leg, and again, you know, to use the gas, is at a very uncomfortable angle. It's like this.
Yeah, and
I'm sure same with you.
So I also find the pedal spacing is different, I think, in the 88 versus at least the later ones. I feel like the gas pedal's off over farther to the right, because I missed it one time. I actually hit the brake instead of the gas, which, again,
boots, you can easily do that, yeah.
Check me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I think it's fairly similar.
Yeah, it sounds good. It runs good, and I drove the day that we had to jump it and got it to the shop, and it drove nicely that day. But you've done a lot more work on it since then. So
yeah, it's a little bit more sorted than it was before. So comparisons of the two off the bat.
Wow. Obviously, you've got the old school dash in here, which is cool in its own way, but it's not pretty. All right. You know, you had the interior designers show up for the soft dash, and that was used in so many vehicles for so many years. But I think this might drive a little bit better because the brakes are better. But just going up this hill, like it's struggling. They're finally downshifted at the top of the hill, and now of course I'm going like 40. But the power of that, well, they kind of pulled a Ford, right? That's actually a 3.9 with a 4.0 badge on it. Like the Ford 302 was a 5 liter, but it was really a 4.9. I don't know why. Other than even Jeep had a 4 liter back then. This really, I like the way this one drives.
It's
a little lower to the ground. Maybe it handles a little bit better.
Well, it's also got 60,000 less miles.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
So the rubber bits up front, though oily, are actually in very good condition. And since it is a little bit lower to the ground, I think it feels much more planted. And also with the less knobby road tires that it has on it, it drives very normally. It drives tight. I mentioned that in a lot of my videos, and that kind of makes it a little more of an attractive package.
Clock even works. Hold on back there, because I don't know what's going on with the brake. Except for a really soft brake pedal. Hopefully you saw that in his video already, but yeah, that goes. It's about 6 inches of travel before anything really happens. The ABS light is on. Anti-lock light is on. Maybe has something to do with it. There's definitely heat coming out. Much louder.
All right, so we're back from the drive test. You know, you kind of saw the reactions to both of them, and as far as the last, comparable selection, I guess, for these two trucks is the cool factor, and honestly, I think they're super equal. The color combination on this, the fact that it's a 7-seater, and the fact that it has no sunroof, in my world and the Rover world, I think that really elevates it above some of the other models that are usually white and usually have leaky sunroofs and super rusty. If we switch over here to the 88, it's a very manual truck. There's no ABS. It's a much simpler system. There's no traction control. I think it looks great. You know, it does have rust and whatnot. So they're both super cool trucks in their own regards. They're very compatible. They're also not very compatible, but they're definitely sewn in the same cloth and are really great. You know, project trucks. You can take them, do whatever with them. They're fairly easy to maintain. You know, if you can handle a little bit of wrenching, a little bit of mechanical know-how, you can take care of both of these. So, you know, at the end of the day, I think they're, you know, you want them both, which is in the world that I am in right now. That's kind of how you have to operate. You know, you use one for one thing, use one for the other thing, and you can have a blast with either one. So that's kind of the conclusion. I want to thank Doug for checking out the new purchase before it goes to Andy. I'll try to link his channel coming up here, and you know, feel free to subscribe and drop me some notes there in the comments. We've been putting out a whole lot of Rover content this year, so I'd love you to subscribe and stay tuned for next year. Hopefully we'll see how this truck progresses, and this one as well. As soon as my silver one gets fixed, we're also ordering a bunch of parts and equipment from ARB, so maybe some doing some ARB bumper installs and how-to videos on that as well coming up next year. So appreciate everyone tuning in, and we'll see you next year.